After 9 hours of continuous air raid alerts overnight on August 20th, and now in broad daylight on August 20th, the Russians have launched another attack on Kyiv with jet-powered drones. And now monitoring channels are reporting that on the night of August 21st, the Russians are preparing another massive missile attack on the Ukrainian capital. Well, apparently because they didn't finish off the food warehouses near Kyiv. Now more and more information is coming in about the consequences of the Russian missile strike on the night of August 20th. In particular, one of the enemy's targets was the warehouses of major retail chains, specifically food products.
И известно о том, что горят.
And against this backdrop, more and more alarming articles are appearing in Western media saying that unfortunately, it's no longer possible to hide the fact that there are fewer and fewer products on supermarket shelves in Ukraine. And today, a touching article was published by the New York Times, which actually describes an eyewitness account of what's happening. For example, in the Silpo supermarket chain in Kyiv, and there, unfortunately, the shelves are emptying out because the Russians are targeting the warehouses of retail chains. First and foremost, of course, grocery chains. And at the very beginning of this episode, I want to show you this photo. In this photo, you see a warehouse, a grocery warehouse, where regular watermelons were stored. And last night, the Russians struck this warehouse with their missile. And in this context, as you know, the Ukrainian authorities are asking their partners to help protect Ukraine's skies, to provide more missiles for anti-missile and air defense. But so far, this hasn't happened. However, there is information that a NATO reconnaissance plane is conducting constant surveillance in the northwestern part of Poland. This is evidenced by data from the AirNow radar service. And here in particular is the Boeing EE-3A aircraft. Sentry constantly monitors to make sure, God forbid, that Russian missiles do not leave Ukrainian territory and do not fly toward Poland. That's where they provide protection. But they can't provide Ukraine with more Patriot missiles so that the Russians don't burn down food storage facilities. Well, it's known that as a result of the repeated attack on Kyiv, a business center is currently on fire in Kyiv. So let's discuss the latest information together right now. My name is Alexei, and before we begin, I ask you, as usual, to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're moving toward the 300,000 subscriber mark, so I'll be grateful for each of your subscriptions. So after 5 o'clock p.m. Kyiv time, Russia once again attacked Ukraine with drones. Shahed jet drones were flying over Kyiv again. As a result of this attack, a fire broke out in a business center building in the Holosivsky district of Kyiv. This was stated by the mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko. He noted that all emergency services are heading to the scene of the fire. And as reported by the Kyiv City Military Administration, according to preliminary information, 2 people were injured in the Holosivsky district. Rescuers also found one deceased person at the scene. I would like to note that today Russia carried out airstrikes on Kyiv and the region throughout the night. As a result of the enemy attack on the night of August 20th, 15 people were killed. Another 39 people were injured, and 12 people were rescued. And during the day, the enemy attack continues. Since 9 a.m., the air raid siren has already sounded 4 times in Kyiv. And unfortunately, there is information from monitoring channels that on the night of August 21, the Russians will most likely try to repeat their air attack again, this time using both ballistic and cruise missiles. Today, they continue carrying out strikes with jet-powered drones. In addition, the Ministry of Internal Affairs reported that the Kyiv police continue to record the consequences of the enemy's combined attack on Kyiv. Near the impact sites in Darnitsky, mobile police units are operating in Darnitsky, Svyatoshinsky and Solomyansky districts. At the moment, more than 300 reports of property damage have been filed in the city. And against the backdrop of the overnight Russian attack, more and more information is emerging about who and what targets the Russians struck. I should note that the Ministry of Defense of the unwashed Russian Federation claimed that they allegedly targeted sites producing drones and Flamingo missiles. But in reality, that's not the case. I should note that the massive Russian strike began around midnight. First, the Russians launched ballistic missiles at the Kyiv region, then cruise missiles, banderol munitions, and drones followed. In particular, according to the Air Force report, the Russians used ballistic missiles Onyx, Tsirkon, Iskander-M, and S-400 for the strike, 36 cruise missiles Kh-101, Iskander, and Kh-59, 8 caliber cruise missiles, 2 banderol munitions, and 168 Shaheds. And about half of them were jet-powered. And during the day, they continued to strike Kyiv with these jet-powered Shaheds, which resulted in the business center catching fire. And now it's becoming known that they were targeting warehouses. In particular, the Fora supermarket chain reported that their warehouse in Martusivka, Kyiv region, where fresh products were stored, was hit. And the company only started using this warehouse last week, after the previous Russian attack on Fora's logistics infrastructure. And the company's press service stated, quote, "Today we are once again adjusting routes and looking for solutions so that your favorite products remain available." Also, as a result of the night shelling during the Russian attack, the French cosmetics chain Yves Rocher was affected. The company noted that as a result of the massive strike, a warehouse where women's cosmetics are stored was damaged. That was the target. Against this backdrop, the company has temporarily suspended accepting online orders, and restoration work is ongoing. In addition, the company Feini Lyodi, the ones who make ice cream, reported that as a result of the Russian night strike, their distribution warehouse was destroyed. At its Kyiv warehouse, which supplied products to 13 cities, tons of ice cream, equipment, and vehicles were destroyed. And the company assured that they are already working on alternative solutions for supply, storage, and logistics. In addition, the Russian strike was also aimed at the Klo oil depot in the Bravary district of Kyiv region. In the video published by the company, it can be seen that fuel tanks were destroyed as a result of the attack. In addition, the Vera supermarket chain reported that the Russians attacked a warehouse in Borispil, where part of their stock was stored. The consequences are already being assessed, but again, this is yet another target, a warehouse with food products. So it's obvious that the Russians are deliberately targeting warehouses where goods are stored in order to make supermarkets in Kyiv end up empty. So that in fact, well, it would be impossible to buy food in regular supermarkets. And against this backdrop, we have a piece from the New York Times, which today, as I was reading the news summary, I came across it. Well, it's really a touching article, and after reading it, you understand who we are fighting against. We are fighting against savages, against unwashed wild Russians, who, can't live peacefully themselves and are trying to make life worse for others. I'll be quoting a lot here in order to convey the atmosphere itself. The New York Times writes, "Empty shelves in stores are becoming a new problem for Ukrainians, caused by the actions of the Russian Federation. This week it was impossible to hide the empty shelves at the Silpo supermarket in Kyiv. There was no pearl barley, no buckwheat, no quinoa, and no rice. There was also a shortage of green onions and packaged lettuce leaves. Only a single wilted bunch of cilantro was left, as described by the American publication. Residents of the capital faced a shortage of a wide range of basic food products. This happened because of Russian ballistic missile strikes on critical distribution centers. I wanted to buy sugar, but I saw there wasn't any. There's an entire section that's completely empty. I didn't even go there. I don't want to look at it and get upset," said 67-year-old Nina Kirichuk, who was shopping at Silpo. On August 5, the publication reports Russian missiles hit at least 4 warehouses belonging to a company that supplies goods to supermarkets. As a result of the strike, the supply of food to several retail chains was seriously disrupted. The consequences were felt most strongly in the capital, but they also affected other regions, particularly in Zaporizhia. On August 20, Russia once again struck food warehouses near Kyiv. The strikes are taking place against the backdrop of an overall escalation in the area conflict. Ukraine is increasing its strikes on Russian territory. And Moscow is taking advantage of the fact that Ukrainian air defense is weakening. For many years, well-stocked Ukrainian supermarkets were a symbol of how the country tried to maintain normal life despite Russian shelling. But over the past week, grocery chains have admitted that they are facing shortages. Supplies of dairy products, meat, as well as fresh vegetables and fruits have decreased. And according to the New York Times, in one of the small stores in Kyiv, the only products left were 6 soft avocados, as well as some remaining onions and garlic. In another store, ramen, paper plates and plastic cutlery were gone. Or am I the only one starting to panic because of these empty shelves, wrote beauty influencers on social media, adding that she bought the last 4 packs of baby food in one store, after she couldn't find anything in another. Pets are also suffering because of the Russian strikes. 56-year-old Svetlana Petruchuk is worried that she won't be able to buy a specific brand of food for her Yorkshire Terrier, Lord. Grocery chains say they will be able to fully restock by Independence Day, August 24th. Ukrainians are joking on social media about the return of the USSR. Some elderly shoppers remember the famines that Ukraine has experienced throughout its history. And they are stocking up on canned goods and staples like sugar, pasta and flour. That's the kind of article published by the New York Times. And I really want to believe that materials like this can somehow influence the Western community, which so far just isn't responding in terms of strengthening Ukraine's air and missile defense. Even though we are asking for it very urgently. But in contrast, other information appears, which also surprised me a little, to put it mildly. I understand that these are quite logical actions by our partners to protect themselves. But I would like our partners to help close Ukrainian airspace. In particular, there was information that a NATO reconnaissance plane is conducting surveillance in the northwestern part of Poland. This is evidenced by data from the Air Now radar service. But it's not just one plane. According to the service, a Boeing E-3A Sentry took off at 8:30 today from Geilenkirchen Air Base in Germany. It flew several loops between the Polish cities of Gdańsk and Bydgoszcz. According to the service data, a US reconnaissance aircraft, Gulfstream EA-37B, is heading to the same area.
Который начал полет в Греции.
The third aircraft, another Boeing E-3A, took off from the same German airbase at 9:30 and is heading towards the Balkans. I should note here that all 3 of these are AWACS system aircraft. They serve as airborne radar surveillance and control centers. The main task of such aircraft is to detect, identify and track aerial targets. It also transmits the information it receives to NATO command centers, fighter jets or ground platforms. And a noticeable part of the aircraft is that very radar rotating above the fuselage. Such a radar can detect moving targets at extremely low altitudes. I would like to believe that all these aircraft help the Ukrainian air defense system detect all Russian targets flying toward Ukraine. But the problem is that since there are no Patriot missiles, even if ballistic missiles are detected, there's simply nothing to shoot them down with. And this is really a problem, especially considering that Russia, as you can see, is trying to completely destroy these very food warehouses in order to... Well, apparently supermarkets in Kyiv would be empty, causing panic. And I guess so that society would put pressure on the authorities, possibly to force capitulation. That is, in one of the previous episodes I actually mentioned that Putin is going all in. He understands that he can't sustain the war for much longer himself. His economy won't survive another year, 2 or 3 of war. Maybe it can last 1 more year, but not more. That's why he's trying to go all in, hitting everything he can. He doesn't care about the loss of war anymore, although he never really followed them anyway. But hitting the energy sector didn't work. He targeted thermal power plants in previous winters and that didn't work either. Now he started targeting, well, objectively food supplies, that is, food products. Once again, I showed the photo at the beginning of the episode that just breaks my heart. This is a warehouse where watermelons were stored. Watermelons. What is this? Is this something that threatens Russia? And now Russia is striking warehouses like this with its missiles. Therefore, friends, most likely, on the night of August 21st, there will be another massive attack. Therefore, make sure you take shelter and do not ignore air raid alerts. I'll leave it at that. Subscribe to the channel, share your opinion in the comments, and click the bell so you don't miss new releases on this YouTube channel. That's all for now. Be sure to take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.